Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I can do it right like this. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Brian, and hello everyone. My name is Stefan. Working at Spin Function as a software engineer. You can find me anytime at stefan@spinfunction.com. And today I'm going to talk about an experiment that we did with the Wikimedia Foundation. That's in essence the the ability to decouple MediaWiki authentication from the system in order to move the complexity of that to an external IDM provider. And yeah, I'm going to kind of jump right into it. I hope my slides. Yep, I can see that you see my slides. So we're going to structure the talk arond the segment framework. And for those of you who are not familiar with the framework, it's basically 6 questions you want to answer when you're trying to do something. It's quite popular in the enterprise architecture. And we are going to do a shorthand version of it today, just focusing on what, why, and how. And right up front, what this talk is about. So basically, we're going to state the hypothesis and I'm going to dive deeper into the actual situation on how kind of identity sharing inside uh, Wikipedia works for a large set of MediaWiki instances. But we're going to go up front and say the hypothesis that decoupling of authentication from the MediaWiki, especially if you have a lot of them, so if you have a farm or I mean a lot of organizations are facing this problem in general, and decoupling the MediaWiki and moving the complexity from the MediaWiki to the IDM system using some extensions are going to help you manage your identities, especially if you have a large amount of identities. And as you all know, Wikipedia does have a large amount of identities. So again, just to state it upfront, this is not about authorization or blocking infrastructure that currently exists on Wikipedia. This is purely about authentication, and this is purely about an experiment that we wanted to do. And it leads me slowly into the question why? Why did we decided to do this experiment? Because a large amount of uncertainty about whether that's going to help or not. There is an existing solution. I'm going to dive in a little bit, but we want to explore this as an option, identify potential challenges with doing that, maybe come up with solutions to them, or at least acknowledge them if possible. And all of this to kind of inform future decision making. Like, is this really feasible? And if it is, what it's going to take to do that? And kind of stating up front, we identified a lot of important things while doing this in general. Okay, so I kind of set the stage a little bit on why and what, and now we come to how. And about how, it's a kind of pretty basic way. What we decided to do is that first we would go in and choose an IDM solution. So, and I'm talking about identity management. And I'm talking about identity management systems. Um, Usually, what people would mean about that is identity and access management. We're not talking about access management right now. So, choose an IDM system. Find a good open source solution that is well maintained to run this, and uh, kind of contribute to it, even if we need to. Then we would create a model of the solution, how we would take this huge existing user base and a lot of MediaWiki instances and try to kind of move this huge system into a new direction uh, if we were to do it. And then we created a POC based on that. So what is the real working code? What are the potential challenges with writing that working code, and what it entails in general? And in order to do that, we're going to go through the why, and we're going to start with choosing an IDM and stating up front, there are a lot of identity management solutions, open source identity management solutions that are pretty good and or even best said really good on the market you can find and use. We looked through a lot of them. Worth mentioning, good use case of this is Fandoms is actually doing that. They have a large set of media wikis and they're using Ori. There is one of the solutions that they use. In our case, we focused mostly on Keycloak as a pretty famous solution that is being used by a lot of organizations. Then there is a Apereo instance that are currently being ran on the infrastructure, so that could simplify a lot of things. And I intentionally added like a custom solution here as an option because this was an option we have considered. But I'm going to move into my next slide, and you'll understand that custom solution already exists, and complexity of that solution is quite big. So we looked at a lot of things while trying to pick something for the experiment, and a lot of criteria. We used documentation, maintainability, extensibility was a large point because we needed to extend the solution to support our use case. That was kind of obvious from the get-go. So by going through things and doing simple pros and cons analysis, we ended up using the key clock for this experiment. And stating up front, like as long as the IDM system supports the following capabilities I'm going to show you on the diagram, it's going to kind of do the job because a lot of the things are with extensions and everything else that we used relies on the kind of protocols like OpenID Connect, so that makes that part interchangeable. So I'm going to start with a big problem, and the biggest problem that we have faced, that's migration of users. There is a currently user base is really large, and it's being held inside the central auth database. This is where I should start the stage a little bit. If you ever used Wikipedia, you would go to any Wikipedia, you would log in, or you would create an account, and you can use that account across all the Wikipedias, right? And currently, extension called central auth, maybe a lot of you are familiar or unfamiliar with it, is being used to actually do the job, to share those user identities between the system. And you can see it in green on this diagram, on this model that I've created. And what we needed to do, and what was the kind of the stage of the problem, we would try to connect an IDM system. And this is, I'm going to circle back to the keynote that was done today by Cindy, saying that probable auth is one of the most used extensions. You can guess what we have used for this particular experiment. We use central auth, pluggable auth, sorry, I confused the extension name, pluggable auth and OpenID Connect to actually connect MediaWiki instance to the IDM system. So you can see we have a set of MediaWikis, and they are all connected to the central database. And then we needed to figure out how would we even roll out like this IDM system to a single instance, because there's no rolling out the solution to every MediaWiki instance is at once is highly risky and complicated. Kind of predicting the law that is going to happen, maybe something will break. As much as you test things up front, when you go, like when you have this large kind of system this large, it's not as obvious to do it ever, like not as useful to do things all at once. So what we decided to do, like we'll do a 3-step plan and try to figure out whether we can implement this in code. So what ended up happening is that we took our ADM system and we connected it to the central database using so-called federation provider. And you might be familiar with those tools if you ever used Keycloak or any other identity manager. They usually have built-in, for example, LDAP providers that allows you to use your existing users in LDAP or any other kind of user management, identity management protocols right away. And one other things to mention on this diagram, there's violet squares. Those are not a separate things. This is basically extensions that we have added to the EDM system. I just wanted to highlight them as a big part of the solution, right? So idea is that we would roll this out to one MediaWiki instance, and we would use the user federation provider that's connected to the central auth database, and that we would interact with the existing database to kind of give users the ability to use the credentials that they already have and continue business as usual, right? And at the same time, one other thing is that if it fails, we still have a rollback plan. So we kind of do a simple deployment, we turn off the extension, and everything goes back to be business as usual. And one of the things you'll see on this blog that MediaWiki is connected to the IDM system and the central auth database at once. And that's intentional to have the backward compatibility between those. So if we go to MediaWiki number 1 and then I try to log into MediaWiki number 2, the same user or I create a user in MediaWiki number 1 or number 2, all of that is still interchangeable. I still can do my work, and if anything happens, I can roll back. And then moving on to the second part of the plan. And the second part of the plan was now we start switching more MediaWiki instances, right? And they start using the IDM system. Then the problem arises is, well, this have not reduced the complexity, neither it moved the complexity nowhere. This created much more complexity than there was before in the beginning, right? So there should be an end goal. There should be something we're going to introduce that's going to move the complexity from the software to the IDM system. And one of the things that we kind of figured would be the way to do it is that we would start a synchronization job. So you can see this new violet square on the diagram. That's a user migration job. That's when we start migrating users from the central auth database into the IDM system, while everything still stays backward compatible. So as a user, you don't know that some migration is happening. You don't see any kind of hiccups in your workflows. You continue your workflow as usual. And there's that. And what else? One thing to mention, again, user migration job here is a part of the extension to the Keycloak that we have developed. I'm calling it an extension, but it's kind of user federation provider, and other federation provider like LDAP and other things allow you to synchronize users as well. So we just created that adaptation for a specific use case. And now let's move into the happy ending, right? So assuming everything went well and everything works and we are kind of moving on with our lives, now we have users migrated from the central auth into an IDM system. Again, stating up front, this does not mean that central auth extension can be removed from the system. There's still a lot of functionality in it. This is just a step to removing the authentication, decoupling it into a separate thing. And there are still a lot of things that needs to go on, but authentication and identity management in this hypothetical scenario in our POC was moved out of the system into the IDM system. And another cool thing we discovered along the way is, right, if you remember on the previous diagram, and I'm going to show it really briefly, we have this password hashing SPI. And we needed to support different hashing algorithms that currently exist in MediaWiki itself to allow users to use their existing credentials. What we figured out that during the migration, you can actually move the users from the database to database by changing the format and saving it, just changing the format. It's being saved in the Keycloak database, and that's going to allow Keycloak to work with the existing algorithms, and it surprisingly well supports them, so that credentials are being moved and managed. And so in this scenario, as we said, we move the complexity into the IDAM system that's being supported by people whose main job is identity management. And one of the other things I need to mention here as well is API usage. So one of the things you would probably heard of is API gateway is being actively developed to hide the API users. Well, not hide, probably not a proper word. To allow API users to query the different APIs through the API gateway, and to simplify the workflow of using the APIs. For those of you who used the APIs of MediaWiki, especially if in current foundations way there is a REST API and there's an Actions API, and you have to know your way around that. So hiding that behind the API gateway, we needed to support that use case as well. We needed to make sure that we can take this IDM system and plug it into the API gateway to support user authentication, as well as there is a possible support of development and new services, new API services that will live behind that API gateway, and then we provide the same identity management to them as well. And this is pretty much it from me. All of this to say, what I wanted to end on a little bit is that importance of running those kinds of experiments. It's not always possible. It doesn't look feasible a lot of the time, but you're creating the hypothesis, you validate the hypothesis, and then you adjust what you do. And maybe the code that we did and POCs that we did is never going to go into production. That's possible. But now all of the things that were unknown problems become known problems, and we identified them along the way. So that's going to help to make informed decision making in the future. And that's it from me. Thank you all very much for listening.